This podcast contains explicit content and is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Don't say we didn't warn you.
Hi, welcome. My name is Madison.
And I'm Hannah.
And you are listening to, or possibly watching, Who's Knocking?
A true crime podcast.
Yes. So today we have part 4 of the Jeffrey MacDonald series.
Yep.
It's kind of part 2 of the A Wilderness of Error. And yeah, this will be the conclusion. This is the deepest dive we've yet to take. So definitely interested in feedback. If you like us going into multi-parters, if you prefer single parts, please don't be shy. Let us know. Anything we need to talk about off the top?
I don't think so.
All right. Let's get straight into it. Fuck it. Okay. So we left off last week and we spoke mostly about Helena and the beginning of A Wilderness of Error. So it's a book by Errol Morris, and his book kind of seems like to me it seems a lot like he's trying to prove Jeffrey MacDonald's innocence.
For sure.
So, okay. So, and we left off, I think, at the end of the trial. Was that where we left off?
I don't remember.
But I'm going into
her barefoot boyfriend.
Yeah. So that all the stuff that happened during the trial. Okay. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that's where we left off.
Okay.
So pretty much right after the trial, the defense evidence guy, the guy that the defense hired as their evidence, his name is John Thornton, if you recall from last episode. He learned that there were some very essential laboratory notes that had been withheld from the defense.
Okay.
Thornton asserts that the defense did not have the opportunity to examine the prosecution's evidentiary witness. His name was Stromba. I don't think I mentioned him before, but he was the one who was on the stand talking about the analysis that the FBI did for the prosecution, like with all the pajama top stuff and everything. So Thornton said that when the defense did not have an opportunity to examine Stromba's bench notes, and they didn't have an opportunity to examine them until after he finished his testimony. And beforehand, Thornton had only received the FBI's typewritten version, which he claims omitted some very key factors. So upon comparing both sets of notes, Thornton discovered that there were 6 discrepancies concerning the directionality of the punctures.
Oh.
And so he says that a change in direction of even one single hole discredits the entire reconstruction.
Because their reconstruction was basically, like, I remember this part because it's such a key piece. Basically,
Exactly.
The idea was that, or the prosecution was saying that if you fold up the pajama top, it looks like the punctures were exactly matching the stab wounds in Colette's chest, and it was straight circular punctures. But then when they were showing it in the the recreation during the trial, they were saying that it didn't add up, and they were saying that Jeffrey's story didn't add up, and what he claimed, which was that he was holding the pajama top to defend himself from assailants, if he had actually been doing that, the punctures would have been like
more
slashes.
torn, in like a tear-like fashion.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Yeah, and I don't think that they necessarily proved beyond a reasonable doubt that that is the case. And like, that's what Errol Morris asserts.
Yes.
But the key thing with them is like, they were like, this is exactly how it was folded. So this is like, they claim that they made it like to a T exactly how it was. So if there was certain holes that didn't match the directionality, then that really puts the entire thing into question, because that means you did not fold it exactly the way it was folded. So I don't know, definitely maybe something was flipped in a way and like it could have happened, but that he's saying, and I don't disagree, although I'm not an expert, so like who knows, but that does seem to really discredit their entire construction or reconstruction.
Yeah.
And this is on top of the issues that Errol Morris pointed out that we talked about last time, where I think her name was Shirley Green, was the lady who actually did the analysis or the experiment. And there was a number of things we talked about last episode that she's like Oh yeah, where they talked about how the ice pick was tapered, so you should be able to tell like which hole goes on top of the other hole or whatever. And they're like, oh, we didn't even consider that.
Yeah.
So
few mess ups there, but that's pretty significant.
Yeah, and it's pretty shady that the notes didn't match up.
Yeah.
That's fucked.
Yeah.
So John Thornton ended up writing to Judge William H. Webster, who was the director of the FBI at the time, regarding the matter and wanting to reevaluate the crime scene. And in his letter, I won't read it because I'm going to read a lot of things, but he was very careful, like, not to blame the FBI. Like, he was really tiptoeing around. But to Errol Morris's knowledge, there had been no reply. And further, a few years later, in 1982, there were letters between Judge Webster and D. Lowell Jensen, who was an assistant attorney general, that made it very clear that the government was shutting down this inquiry and they didn't want to open it. Quote, this is part of the letter, "It is our view that any reprocessing of the crime scene for alleged undetected evidence should occur only as a result of an order from the district court, and that in that event, no processing should be done by defense experts." So this is clear they don't want the defense looking into the evidence.
Yeah.
Which just is so shady. Like, I don't know what the rules are surrounding this kind of thing, but to me, the justice system should always want to seek the truth.
For sure.
That should be the main goal. So if somebody's trying to look at evidence later, like,
they should be allowed to look at it.
If you're not worried about your verdict, you shouldn't be worried about it.
Yeah.
That it should be free. The trial's over. It should be free for anybody to look at. And maybe there's a reason that that's not the case or shouldn't be the case that I'm not thinking about. I'd love to discuss if anybody knows. But to me,
I feel like there was a lot of stuff like that, though.
Yeah, well, that's the crux of this entire thing, which is why it's so interesting.
Yeah.
And fucked.
So it's so fucked. Like, the defense not having access to the storage locker with all the evidence. Not fair.
Yeah, and that's in, as we were saying in the last episode, and what Thornton was saying, it's like the difference between North Carolina and California,
right,
where he works. So, and I'm sure that things have evolved to now. But this is again this is the 80s. This is like 79, 80.
40 years ago, though.
Yeah, and as you'll see, I think one of the most I guess things that I think that has changed a rule or a law is like the what's it called with Helena, the statute of limitations to murder, which we'll get into a little bit more. But like,
I remember you mentioning it.
By the time she's like admitting things on TV, the statute of limitations is out.
It's too late. By the way, I watched the interview with Jeffrey. Side note: I watched the interview with Jeffrey MacDonald.
Which one?
The one where he was on a like talk show.
The Dick Cavacho, when he was really young.
Yes, the like clips of it and stuff, and that makes him seem really suspicious because he's just like laughing and joking, and there's like a laugh track when he's talking about it. And he's like, "Yeah, my daughter would have loved this." It's like,
yeah, she's fucking dead now.
Yeah,
and
potentially by your hands. So that was really suspicious. And at this point in time, just so everyone knows, I am starting to lean towards, like, just at this specific moment, starting to lean towards a little bit of guilt on Jeff's side. Because what the fuck? Like, who is so casual and cheerful and upbeat talking about, like, his wife and children's murders?
Well, and it's
on a talk show.
It's that specific interview where Freddie was.
That's when Freddie turned. Yeah,
and
I kind of turned too.
Absolutely, don't blame him.
Yeah, but still, like, it does seem like the trial wasn't fair. It does seem, for sure. I mean, there was a lot of issues, obviously, with the trampling through the crime scene and all of that. So that's not fair to Jeffrey, obviously, but it's. Well, the interview does not make him look good.
I think, and I think what I'll get into a lot more is, like, to me, what I do know is the trial, or what I believe the trial was not fair.
Yeah.
And you see this, like, this really reminds me of the Scott Peterson case, which has all been, he's been going through some extra stuff about maybe getting a new trial. And right now, I don't know if it's concluded yet, but I think Scott Peterson killed his wife.
Right.
But I think there's reasons, that he did not get a fair trial.
Yeah.
And even if you think the person is guilty, the system has to work. Because if somebody gets an unfair trial and they were innocent, that's their life.
Yeah. I mean, if they're innocent, it's
yeah, and you never know. Like, you get pulled into something because of some weird reason, and I have a lot of, I'm very skeptical of a lot of forensics. I love forensics, but
So
oh my God, they can get so fucked up, and they can get so, people can read them so differently, and we're able now to detect such minute, tiny pieces of DNA that it's like, it's too much. It's too much, so that it's like, oh, you shook someone's hand and then you go out and murder somebody, and then his DNA is on that body. And I was
reading, one of the things I was reading about this case was because Jeff had said that Helena was holding a candle. And so then they did a search looking for candle wax, and they found a few spots of candle wax in the apartment. But then I know some people were saying, okay, it was all proven to be from something else. One drop might have been from an unknown source, but it was found like behind the couch. And it's like, yeah, those things were found, but one drop of wax from like behind the couch, it doesn't really seem like it
just a lot of red herrings. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyways, and I have more to tell you about another wrongful conviction I want to tie into this, but I'll say that for later.
Yeah. Cool.
I've been browsing Reddit, so everyone knows I'm getting lots of ideas about this case.
Good.
Yeah.
We'll have a big
Reddit.
conclusion. Okay. So later during the appeal process, the defense put forward petitions to be given access to the crime scene.
Okay.
And Judge Dupree, who was still on the case, denied these petitions.
Of course he did.
And handed the crime scene back over to the military. So then in June of 1984, the CID removed a number of items from 544 Castle Drive, including a bunch of medical supplies. Remember, he had this like big closet that was like chocked full of medical supplies.
Yeah, with
like,
the latex gloves.
No, the latex gloves were under the kitchen sink.
Okay. Not medical.
Like way in the back. But he had a medical supply closet that, and he's a doctor, so it's not crazy. He's like, I always wanted to be prepared. But like, he had stuff like he could like do a surgery on somebody if he needed to. I mean, which, you never know.
Do a surgery.
So they removed medical supplies, some candles, 2 decorative wine bottles covered in wax.
Okay.
And then they burned everything that was left in the house.
Why?
Because the defense wanted to go look in there.
That's annoying.
That's so fucking rude.
You can't do that.
They did.
Okay.
That's why I'm mentioning it. Like,
yeah, just burn it all.
Anyway, one of the first appeals that the defense mounted was regarding Judge Dupree not allowing the 6 witnesses.
Yeah.
The 3-judge panel unanimously agreed to deny the appeal, but one of the judges, Judge Francis D. Mernigan Jr., just could not help but write up a concurrence, and I will read that. And a concurrence, I don't know exactly what it is, but I think it's just like a statement to like accompany the judgment. That's what this is. Okay. It's kind of long, so buckle in, guys. But I think it's important.
Yeah.
Quote, the defense had Quote, the defense of a marauding, drug-crazed, purposeless group of homicidal maniacs is one which, absent the events surrounding the behavior of Charles Manson and the excruciating horror of the indescribably base murder of Sharon Tate, would have been dismissed as so incredible as to merit no serious attention. All that changed with the advent of Manson. Thereafter, the possibility of such an occurrence, while still macabre, was considerably enhanced. The evidence, in my humble judgment, tended to show an environment in the vicinity of the military base where MacDonald was stationed in which persons might indeed emulate Manson or independently behave in such a fashion.
Shit.
Helena Stokely was shown to be a person of no fixed regularity of life, roaming the streets nocturnally at about the time of the crimes, dressed in a bizarre fashion. I don't know how bizarre, but whatever. Yeah. And capable of so short-circuiting her mental processes through an indiscriminate taking of drugs that A, she could well accept her presence and to some extent her involvement in the MacDonald murders, and B, she could become so separated from reality that on the fatal evening she was ripe for persuasion to participate. I conclude with the observation that the case provokes a strong uneasiness in me. The crimes were base and horrid, and whoever committed them richly deserves severe punishment. As Judge Bryan has pointed out, one of the other judges, the evidence was sufficient to sustain the findings of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Don't know if I agree there.
Yeah.
Still, the way in which a finding of guilt is reached is, in our enduring system of law, at least as important as finding of guilt itself. I believe MacDonald would have had a fairer trial if Stokely-related testimony had been admitted.
That's fair.
In the end, however, I am not prepared to find an abuse of discretion by the district court, and so concur.
Okay.
In view of the issues involved and the virtually unique aspects of the surrounding circumstances, had I been the trial judge, I would have exercised a wide discretion conferred on him to allow the testimony to come in. My preference derives from my belief that if the jury may be trusted with the ultimate resolution of factual issues, it should not be denied the opportunity of obtaining a rounded picture necessary for resolution of the large questions. By withholding of collateral testimony consistent with and basic to the defendant's principal exculpatory contention. If such evidence was not persuasive, which is what the government essentially contends in saying that it was untrustworthy, the jury, with very great probability, would not have been misled by it. End quote.
I mean, yeah, I don't think it was really fair.
Yeah, but so, and I just find it a little annoying that he like agrees with. He's so like, annoying. He's like, yeah, it was fair. Like basically by voting to not allow the appeal, you're saying you had a fair trial. But then he goes on to say it could have been fairer.
Yeah.
And my question is like,
it's fair enough.
Is fairness a scale, or is it fair or not fair?
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, I don't know, maybe a debatable question. Like, of course, something can be fairer than the other, but like when we're talking about innocent until proven guilty, a court of law, is there a spectrum of like where on the spectrum is it okay if it's like 5% fair, 10% fair?
Yeah.
Like, or should it be it is fair or it is not fair?
It should be, to me, both sides should be allowed to present exactly the evidence that they want and leave it up to the judge and the jury, right? Like, isn't that how it should go?
Yes, and I mean, there's some things that, for a lot of reasons, that you have to go through a judge and you have to decide whether or not it should be allowed because some things are prejudicial.
Yeah.
Things like there's or it doesn't even it's
like
me,
invalid.
It's like there was a point where one of the prosecutors, do you remember the Esquire magazine that they found, and it had a smear of blood on it,
and it had a story about murderous hippies, and some people had said that's where Jeff got the idea to create this cover up.
Yeah, so there was one point where he went through the magazine for hours in the trial, and it was like I don't think it was necessary to allow all of that. But then you don't let in the 6 witnesses who talk about Helena, who the judge has decided is unreliable. So if she's unreliable, that's one thing. But then you need to be able to like allow other people who are quote unquote reliable,
right,
to then be able to talk about this person. Because just because they're unreliable now doesn't mean that they're not an important aspect of the case.
Super important. And didn't the judge allow them to speak but chose not to let the jury hear, which is like,
yes.
What
basically
the fuck, dude?
he was listening, and he's like, okay, if I think this is, and so it's, and that's the thing that really, and another thing that I think is just horrible is that when you go through appeals, you're appealing to the same judge.
Right.
And that
He's
just
biased.
That doesn't make, well, first of all, this judge is biased, but even in a regular case, you are then going up to the judge and saying, you
did a shitty job.
You were wrong.
Yeah.
And you did a shitty job. I don't like the job you did.
Right.
Let me redo it. And they have the power to just be like, no.
Yeah. And in some cases, like when people appeal, it's like, go fuck yourself. You don't have grounds to do that. Yeah. But in this case, I mean,
and I think there's maybe. Like in the justice system, there's like kind of 2 camps that I kind of have gathered. And one is that like you follow the law to the T, you follow the Constitution and the law, and like it's black and white, and like everything falls under every minute detail. Or there's the other camp who's like, judges should have more discretion and be kind of able to, pick and choose. And it's really hard because I think in some situations, especially in a situation like this, it's like, no, you should have followed the law specifically. You should have not like, we don't, because he seems biased. Like, I don't want him using his own discretion.
Right.
But then there's other cases in which it's, to me, seems more fair for somebody to be using their discretion because maybe the laws don't make sense.
Yeah. So
it's a lot to wrap your head around.
It really is. This case is that. I mean, I go day to day. I'll switch what I believe.
Me too.
I mean, I'm personally more interested like, I'm very interested in the legal proceedings in this case specifically, but I'm more interested in, did he do it or did he not do it? That's because I think there's two questions, right? Did he get a fair trial, and is he innocent or is he guilty? Which I think he could have been proven innocent through reasonable doubt with the right lawyer, with the right judge, with the right circumstances.
With reasonable doubt, it's not proving that you're innocent. It's just
but
proving,
it's not.
It's just the prosecution is not proving your innocence.
Right. Because was that what OJ got?
Everything is, it's guilty or not guilty.
Yeah,
there's no proving somebody's innocence in a court of law. That doesn't exist. The only time that you're really kind of proving someone's innocent is like on appeal. Then it's more you have to like present evidence of innocence.
Like something compelling.
Because you've already been proven guilty.
Right.
But in a court of law, there's no trial where you need to prove somebody's innocence. The defense is always the prosecution has to prove you guilty. Right. And if they cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you are guilty, you are not guilty. Not meaning that you're innocent.
Yeah, but you're free to go, essentially.
Yeah.
So that's like the situation with OJ, essentially, where he maybe killed his wife.
Oh,
I just started reading that maybe it was his brother.
No, fucking
yeah. He seems like, and If I Did It. Did you read If I Did It? His book.
No,
it's called If I Did It, and he's like, I just read it on the internet. I don't think he profits from it, but he goes, yeah, like I just blacked out. Or no, he's like, Nicole's always like getting so mad at me, and I'm like, please, Nicole, stop. You're just upsetting me.
Oh, Stephen Williams.
And yeah, exactly. And then he's like, oh, I just blacked out and then she was there in a pool of blood. What happened? Like, come on, bro. Anyways.
Yeah, anyway, let's
Speaking of
keep going.
Questionably resolved trials.
Yeah, there's a lot. So in 1983, a Freedom of Information Act had been filed successfully in the case. And so suddenly hundreds of documents were released. So like all the evidence was just handed over. And the defense was finally able to view all the evidence that was previously withheld from them. Awesome. 1983, post-trial. So in light of this, Brian O'Neill, who is the current lawyer of Jeffrey, he hired a man named Raymond Shedlick. Who was a retired detective with 20 years experience, and he agreed to take on the evidence and brought his daughter, Ellen Donnelly, to help him with organizing of the files. They essentially came on as private investigators. Okay. And there was an absolutely excessive amount of documents, so it was pretty much a full-time job for them. And Raymond had been aware of the case, and even though he'd been working for the defense, he told them going in that he was only interested in what the evidence said, stating, quote, "Whatever I find, that's what it is. It's only the facts," end quote. Okay. So he claims to be very unbiased and impartial and blah, 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 whatever.
That's what we need, so.
Raymond has since died of cancer, but Errol Morris spoke with Ellen about the evidence and went through his findings and multiple video interviews that Raymond had conducted. And besides her claim that there was a bunch of discrepancies in the blood analysis, which she admits she's not an expert in, her two big claims were these. One, in addition to the blue fibers that we all know came from the pajama top and some purple cotton fibers that were also known to have come from the pajama top, there were also a number of black wool fibers found in Colette's mouth, on the club, and on her pajama top. These fibers, Ellen claims, were not from the pajama top, and they were ignored. They were also not found to be sourced from anything else in the house. And Jeffrey also claimed at one point that the woman attacker with the blonde wig and the floppy hat had been wearing a black wool skirt. Okay. Two, they also found 3 blonde synthetic fibers, 22 to 24 inches long, in a hairbrush. The defense claimed that these hairs came from a doll, and we will get to this.
Okay. Also, if she was wearing a skirt, how did those fibers end up in Colette's mouth?
I don't know, and I don't know how
like how accurate?
See, this is also forensics that I'm skeptical of. Yeah. But I could definitely come up with a situation how they got there. Like she could have grabbed at Colette. She could have been hit with somebody could have swung the club hitting the skirt and then it went into Colette's mouth. And then they hit Colette. There's a number of ways it could have happened. And I think it's dangerous to start getting really specific with claims. Right. We know if she was in the house during a big kerfuffle, fibers can get everywhere. Right. They're like tiny. And like if the situation in which intruders came in and caused a big scene, who the hell knows what the fuck they were doing and like whose maybe she sat on her mouth. Like, who
Right,
knows?
right.
These are, if they were doing that, like, they're weird fucking people.
Yeah.
I don't know. So when Ellen asked Errol Morris, quote, do you feel the government, when Ellen was asked by Errol Morris, sorry, quote, do you feel the government went out of their way to make, end quote, she cut him off saying, quote, they darn well knew that these threads weren't all purple. They had the notes, the same notes I was looking at. So they picked and chose what they wanted to use because in their minds, they figured he's guilty, right or wrong, end quote. So Errol Morris goes into detail with this synthetic blonde hair. Here's what we know. We know that Jeffrey claimed the woman involved was wearing a blonde wig, a very specific claim.
Yep.
2, we know that Ken Micah saw a woman with long blonde hair standing alone in the rain on the way to the crime scene. And both of these, like, Jeffrey stated that the woman with the blonde wig was there before anybody found out that Ken Micah saw a blonde-haired woman, right?
Okay.
So those are independent.
Yep.
We know that Helena Stokely had a long blonde wig and was known to wear it often, and she got rid of it shortly after the murders.
Yep.
We know that at least 3 synthetic blonde hairs were found on a brush of Colette's at the crime scene. We know that Colette owned some wigs and hair pieces, but apparently these hairs did not match them. So the prosecution claims that this hair came from a doll.
Okay.
But the hair did not match any of the dolls in the house or any of the dolls that the girls were known to have had. And the prosecution claims that they came from this doll called like a Paularina doll or some weird doll, but
okay.
It seems like they did not come from that type of doll because they're too long, which we'll get into. When Raymond and Ellen were doing their investigation, they could not find any friends of the girls who remembered having dolls with that length of hair, who would have brought them over to the house, etc. And, as a side note, I think it would be very difficult all these years later. I can't remember all the dolls that Isla has. I can't remember dolls that I had in my childhood. I think it's very possible there was a doll in the house, but it would have had to be there close enough to the time to, like, be in the brush, right? I mean, also depending, like, did Colette ever clean her hairbrush? Yeah. I've had a hairbrush that I went through to clean the other day and was like, I had not cleaned it in a very long time. So maybe it was like 5 years ago that a doll came. Yeah. So the hairs were made from a fiber called saran. The FBI contended that this fiber is hardly used in wigs because it doesn't allow the hair to sit flat, to like lay nicely like human hair, but that it was commonly used in dolls. Okay. However, the hairs found in the brush were all a minimum of 22 inches long. I think they were like 22, 23, and 24 inches long. So that's like 2 feet.
That's long.
So it's a long hair.
Yeah, unless it was like one of those like human-sized dolls.
Yeah, which you'd probably remember.
You'd remember, yeah.
They could not find a single doll, including after speaking to doll experts, that had hair that long. Another thing to note about the doll hair is that the way they put it into the doll head, sometimes they have an extra long piece, maybe 24 inches, that gets strung through, making it 2 individual strands. Yeah. However, if somebody were to brush the hair of a doll like that, it would be extremely unlikely that 1, let alone 3 hairs would all be pulled out in their entirety like that. It's very likely that the hairs would break off in pieces smaller than 12 inches. And they spoke to a woman who worked at Mattel, who was a doll expert of some kind, and she explained this all. She basically said the only way to rip out, like, if the hairs are folded like that, which would make them 24 inches, but the only way that they could get pulled out with a brush is if there was something wrong and loose, and if that were the case, like, there would be chunks of hair missing because it wouldn't be. She's like, I have to go through in tweezers in order to be able to do this. Like, it doesn't, brushing it would just rip it.
Okay, so essentially it seems like this came from a wig that wasn't from the house.
Yeah, and there are pictures of Colette's. She has a couple hair pieces, blonde hair pieces.
Okay, but it doesn't match.
The claim is that they don't match.
Okay.
Upon further analysis of the FBI documents, they found more. They found that the FBI was actually aware that saran hairs were used in wigs. They had 2 books in their possession that stated that. And to be fair, like, after reading that, maybe they didn't read those books, or maybe they didn't read the parts, but it's still a little suspicious. They found that the FBI tried to get a statement from the Mattel lady, who explained about the hair length issue. She explained that what I had just said about the 24-inch hairs being used as 2 12-inch hairs. And when they pressed her further about this, trying to get her to, like, create a situation in which the hairs would come out, she asked them straight up if they were trying to railroad him. And they said according to her, quote, "No, we know he's guilty. There's plenty of other evidence to prove it," end quote. The prosecution then sent her an affidavit to sign a few weeks later, with the two main claims being that, one, saran was the major fiber used in Mattel dolls until the 80s,
Okay.
and two, that 24-inch long hair could be doubled into two 12-inch hairs.
Right.
She refused to sign it. It's not that the information was exactly wrong, but the way it was written was extremely misleading. And she's like, that's not how I said it.
Yeah.
I said very specifically, she's like, I know what you're doing and I'm not signing this.
Nice.
And the final super fishy thing about the whole hair situation was that the man from the FBI who was leading this specific part of the investigation was a man named Michael Malone. And Michael specialized in wig and hair fibers.
Okay.
He'd been nicknamed Agent Death because of all the people his work had helped put onto death row.
That's scary.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
His testimony was key in a number of famous murder cases.
Okay.
But get this. I'm going to...
Let's hear his perspective.
So this is all okay. So this is Errol Morris's version of events, or his writing.
Okay.
Quote, Malone's specialty was hair and fiber. Time and again, in cases with no eyewitnesses, no confession, and no motive, Malone would peer into his twin eyepiece microscope and come up with the evidence that helped send somebody to prison or death row. Crazy. Malone quickly became a star. He grabbed headlines for his work in Fatal Vision, appeals of Jeffrey MacDonald, the Green Beret Army surgeon convicted of murdering his wife and children at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He won praise for helping with the case against John Hinckley, who shot President Ronald Reagan, and Hillsborough County Sheriff deputies credited him with finding the key evidence, tiny strands of fiber that put away Bobby Joe Long, a Tampa Bay area serial killer who tied up his victims before raping and strangling them. The more famous Malone got, the more eager police and prosecutors around the country became for his testimony. And in time, with all the glory Malone achieved, came whispers that turned into murmurs and then a steady buzz. Mike Malone was sloppy. He was a government shill. He stretched the truth, maybe even made things up.
That's fucked if it's true.
On May 21st, 1991, Malone testified at the murder trial of J. William Buckley, the same day he prepared a second affidavit for the MacDonald case. Buckley and an accomplice had been accused of murdering 33-year-old Kathy Wilson in a van. The only physical evidence was hair. It was sent to the New York State Police Crime Lab, but came back inconclusive. The prosecutor then asked Malone at the FBI to take a look at it. Malone testified that not only was there a, quote, very, very strong possibility, end quote, that the hair was the defendant's, he also found one of the victim's hairs on a white blanket in the van that belonged to the accomplice. The only problem was the New York lab had shipped the wrong blanket to the FBI. Even after he was confronted with that fact, Malone stood by his results, and William Buckley was acquitted. But Malone's questionable cases kept piling up. Finally, in 1997, he and 12 other agents became subjects of a Justice Department probe. It found 3,000 suspected cases of misconduct. Malone continued to work in the lab after his malfeasance was first reported. He retired in 1999, but that was after the Fourth Circuit had disposed of the blonde saran fiber issued once and for all.
Wow. But I mean, him messing up and like being sketchy on other cases doesn't necessarily mean like he's not valid.
No, none of this evidence, and that's the whole deal with all this evidence, is none of it
could refute everything, basically.
Everything is questionable.
Yeah.
And I absolutely agree that this man, maybe he fucked up thousands of cases and did like...
Maybe this one was fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. But if you are putting people on death row...
Yeah,
and
you better be
found
fucking right, man.
Not only fucking up, but like outright lying...
Yeah.
That's not a trustworthy man.
No. Because he's like the superstar, essentially.
Yeah. Anytime like witnesses or forensic analysis people or people who are testifying at trials get famous, it's like, that's questionable.
Right. Shout out to BOC.
Prosecutor. Yeah, no. But like, who's that? There's that like Chinese guy who he testifies at so many things. And I don't know, I think he's probably fine, but like he's a very famous blood analysis guy.
Okay.
And it's just it's an art, right? It's not
exact.
It's not an exact science.
Yeah.
So now we're going to get into the people that Helena had fingered for the murder.
Got
I
it.
hate saying fingernails.
Yeah,
Sounds
weird
so
word.
gross. But who she had accused, I guess.
Okay.
Remember I read a list of them?
Yes.
So I'm going to go over some of them. And also Raymond he started to go through these people and get interviews with them.
Okay.
Or people talking about them. So Greg Mitchell is first up. In 1971, a man who went by the name of Dave showed up at the Manor House. The Manor House was a Christian halfway house just outside of Fayetteville. A place that you could just show up if you had drug or alcohol problems and didn't have anywhere else to go, and they would take you in and
Got it.
blah, blah, blah. So Dave was blonde and about 5'8", and they put him up in a room that he would share with Reverend Randy Phillips.
Okay.
That weekend, or one weekend, the whole group went out to the suburbs of Fayetteville, where the Manor House owned a little farmhouse, and they were refurbishing it. Dave was there, and he helped with the refurbishing. One of those nights, they had a revival, which is a prayer meeting, where people confessed to crimes and like moral sins or whatever.
Oh, shit. Okay.
Anne Kennedy, a woman who worked there, remembers that Dave started behaving very emotionally, and he admitted to everyone that he was a drug addict and that he'd killed people.
Okay.
I will
imagine being at that meeting and it's like, yeah, I used drugs, like I did some petty crimes to get money for drugs. Oh yeah, I murdered people.
I murdered a whole family.
Yeah.
One of them was 2. So here's Anne Kennedy. And this is in the tape, like Raymond Shedlick has a tape of her saying this.
And when was this, by the way?
When was she saying this?
Like when was the guy confessing?
This was, I believe, 71.
Like 81?
No, 71.
So he was confessing to committing murders before. Oh, no.
1971.
Okay,
the murders
this happened in
happened
1970. I was thinking 79 for some reason.
Yeah, the 79 was the trial.
Got it.
So Anne Kennedy, quote, and he was there, and referring to Dave, and when it came time that he asked for a prayer, he asked us to pray for him. There were several men gathered around him, and they were praying for him, and he began to confess. He began to confess that he had murdered. He began to confess using drugs. He began to confess all of these things that were inside him, and he became very emotional, asking God to forgive him for the things he had done. It was as though he was just absolutely torn apart from everything right then, because I guess you can just get so guilty, you've got to do something about it.
Yeah. I've never murdered anyone, but I feel like it would eat you up inside.
Yeah, and that's like what a lot of people were claiming about Helena, that she like kept wanting to confess, but then, and we'll get into it, some people were trying to keep her from doing that. So the next morning after this whole incident, Dave was gone, and so were all of Reverend Randy Phillips' extra clothing. So he'd stole them and took off.
Okay.
Later, Reverend Randy Phillips, Anne Kennedy, and another woman, Juanita Cisneros, went out to the farmhouse. They all told very similar stories about that evening, which I will tell you. So this will be a back and forth between Anne and Juanita. Okay. So Anne says, quote, there's a little road that wound down through the pines to get to the old house, and as we drove through the woods and got to the house, we had to turn our lights on because it was dark enough in the woods that we needed the lights from the car, to see to get in there. And as we got there and drove into the circle where the big tree was, this young man ran out the back door and there was someone with him. End quote. Here's Juanita. Quote, we took a ride out there, and as we got close to the farmhouse, I remember somebody running out of the house, and it was like dusk. It wasn't quite dark, but it wasn't light enough. And the police were called, and when they came in, we went in to see what was there. I didn't see his face, but his figure, his form, the form of his body, he looked like the young boy that had been at the manor earlier. End quote. Here's Anne, quote, we had the key, unlocked the door, and went into the house, and everything seemed okay. The living room, and I walked through the door into the bedroom beside the living room. And there on the wall, written across, the walls were painted in off-white. We had just finished that room on Saturday. Were the words, and it was written in red. I don't know what the person had used to write on the wall, but it was in bright red. And it said, quote, I killed MacDonald's wife and children.
What the fuck?
Quote. It was in 4 rows, and it was written smoothly and evenly. It was written erratically across the wall, just slashed against the wall. And the red was sort of dripping down. It just sent cold chills through my body. End quote. Yeah. And then lastly, here's Juanita. Quote, And there on the bedroom walls was written in, it looked like blood, but it could have been paint. Anyway, when you write with a brush, there were words, quote, I killed MacDonald's wife and children, end quote. To me at the time, it didn't mean anything because I didn't know who MacDonald was, end quote.
What the fuck?
So here you see two women who were there independently giving essentially the exact same story.
Okay.
So Raymond then asked them why they never said anything, and they said that they contacted a deputy, but they also said the police were there. But I guess the police didn't have cameras at the time. I don't know, but to me that's a little weird. They had contacted a deputy who intended to come over and photograph the scene, but at the time he showed up, the wall had been painted over.
Okay.
Don't know who painted over that. Don't know who saw that and was like,
let me just paint over this.
Not going to ask about this at all, but like, let me just paint over it.
This seems just like something I should just paint over.
Yeah, which...
No photos of it either, and like...
and then the farmhouse was eventually sold when the manor house could no longer afford it, and the new owners knocked it down. So like, you could have gone in and chipped out that paint, but it's gone.
Yeah.
So Raymond presented each of the three witnesses with 25 photos, and all of them picked out Greg Mitchell as the Dave.
Okay.
They all signed sworn affidavits claiming the same story independently, and Ray also interviewed Gregory's wife, or ex-wife, who confirmed that he was in a rehab place in Fayetteville in 1971.
Okay.
This was, it was painted over. Sorry, that was kind of out of order. So that's Greg. And this is the man that, I don't know if Helena dated him, but like, he was a Vietnam War vet, and he was described as like a pretty violent and like erratic person. I think it seems like the war affected him in a pretty horrible way.
As I'm sure it would.
As I'm sure happened to a lot of people.
Yeah, that'll fuck you up.
Absolutely.
John Wayne Gacy's dad, Vietnam War vet.
I don't know how you were in Vietnam and weren't affected poorly.
Exactly, yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen Deer Hunter. I love that movie, but crazy. Okay, so then there's Kathy Perry. Kathy was a pretty troubled woman. She had been investigated by the CID in 1970, so like right after.
Wait, I thought it was supposed to be 4 men and 1 woman.
Well, that was the claim, but there's Helena had thrown out so many names after the fact, and so I mean, this is why nothing makes sense.
Nothing makes sense,
and this is my theory too, that like if we take as truth that if we take as fact that Jeffrey was telling the truth, I think it's very possible that he doesn't remember things properly.
For sure.
I think it's very probable that he believes he remembers things properly, but they weren't the case.
Yeah.
I think it's very probable, say there was a situation in where he says that like he was woken up. So when you're woken up from a deep sleep, you're disoriented. Groggy, you have no fucking idea what's going on. So who knows what he's saying.
It takes like a couple minutes to like wake up fully.
Then he claims he was blacked out. He was knocked out and blacked out.
Yeah.
So if we're taking that as fact, like 10 people could have come in and left during the time he was passed out. Who knows?
It's true.
Maybe there was like 10 people who were part of this crime, and 4 of them went in, beat the shit out of him, didn't really do much, but knocked him out. And then like people went through and like 7 or 8 people, like that's not, there's nothing to prove that happened, but there's nothing to disprove that happened either.
Yeah.
Is it possible? It's possible.
Right.
So Kathy Perry, she was investigated by the CID in 1970. Her landlady at the time gave a statement to Peter Kearns, who was one of the original CID investigators. And she told him that Kathy had attempted to stab her son, which is why she evicted her.
That's a bad look.
And just so you know, there's going to be a little bit of animal abuse here.
Oh, no.
Fast forward like 30 seconds if you don't want to hear it.
I like how we can hear everything else, but just not animal
Yeah, that's
abuse.
the only thing I'm going to put warnings for, because everything else, like, you should know. But it's not like animal abuse just, like, comes up so randomly, like, you're not expecting it, and some people just, whatever. So Kathy had stabbed 2 other men that year, and the same landlady's dog.
Ugh.
And the dog was stabbed, quote, until it was flat.
No.
End quote. So, like, extremely violently.
I hate that.
Like, to stab a dog until it is flat,
ew,
that's a lot of stabbing.
Poor dog.
Horrible. The animal abuse is now over.
Oh, thank God.
It appears that there was at least some of these violent episodes occurred when Kathy was high on drugs. Not shocking, though it's never stated which drugs she was on.
I want to know which drugs.
And I think in the 60-minute interview with Helena, she's like talks about how it was mostly LSD, but she also, there's a lot of mention of mescaline the night of the murders. Like, that's what she claimed she was on. But I think they were just doing, like, whatever they could get their hands on.
Like PCP? That'll make you go in a murderous rage, I think.
It's super possible. I think it, especially, like, 60s, 70s, more 60s, but, like, it was a big experimental time. Yeah. And I think people who were, like, just obsessed with drugs and just want to do drugs all the time, it's just like, they'll just take whatever somebody gives them that night, you know? That is speculation, but...
And it could have been anything.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I buy that.
And it could have been a mix of things. Yep. Could have been prescription drugs. There's a lot of speed. Let's talk about speed. I don't really know what speed does.
It just makes you feel like you drank a ton of coffee, I feel like.
Yeah, and so, like, that... I don't know if speed can make you aggressive, but, like, it seems like it's not... It seems to me that it can make you erratic at the very minimum.
Agreed with that.
And if you're maybe an already violent person.
Yeah.
Because it's like, what is your base level? What are your issues before you even take the drugs? Yeah. Because if you're just, like, a horrible, like, messed up person and you, like, take weed, maybe you, like, I don't know, start thinking about planning a murder and then you plan a murder, you know?
The drug alone wouldn't do it, but maybe the combination of, like, a predisposition to violence and... being on drugs to remove inhibitions.
Yeah, and then you have all these poor war vets who just come back from, like,
just
seeing
so
Vietnam
mentally scarred
with no, like, help at all dealing with it. And you mix these people with all these girls who are doing all these drugs and this and that. Like, that's a recipe for disaster.
Bad recipe.
So, anyway, a Mr. Jackie Don Wolverton contacted the defense in 1970 with this story. Quote, this morning, a Mr. Jackie Wolverton called the fraternity house. He said he wanted to talk to somebody about the girl who allegedly was one of the intruders on February 17th, 1970, involved in the MacDonald murders. He told me that there was a woman who had been living in a commune-type lifestyle in Fayetteville. For some reason, she asked Wolverton if she could live with him. He said it was okay. Cool. One night, the woman, whose name is Kathy Perry, attempted to kill him.
Oh, God.
All of these events are subsequent to the February 17th, 1970 crime. When this happened, he said he went and got himself sewed up at the military hospital, that he had the girl admitted for mental evaluations, and that when he went through her belongings, he found the following: blonde wig, a pair of white go-go boots that were dirty, and an address book with Jeffrey MacDonald's name and address in it.
Why did she have his name and address?
End quote. I don't know.
Fuck. Because that's some of the speculation I read online, was that, like, Jeff knew either Helena or he knew some of these people, and that they could often be seen around the base and had visited that area in the past.
And that's, in the 60-minute interview, that's what Helena is saying, that they
knew each other.
That they knew him and they wanted drugs from him, and that's why they were there, to, like, scare him.
And he wouldn't give the drugs.
Which is why it turned to violence.
Fuck. That, yeah. Now it kind of seems like that could be possible.
Okay. Just like, I have no idea. It's so confusing. Piece of
evidence gives me, like, the opposite perspective.
This is the problem with this case. There's too much evidence.
There's a lot.
Too many witnesses. There's too many people saying this and that. Yeah. There's too many people like Ted Gunderson who are just going in there and just mucking everything up and, like, you know, offering her things. And there's one quote in the 60-minute interview where he's like, it's a good time to, like, be a witness. Like, you get, basically implying that, like, somebody like Helena, who I guess, and I think he's inferring here that, like, the statute of limitations is up. Mm-hmm. It's like you can make a lot of money by selling your story. Like, you just don't need those incentives mixed into this already complicated case, Ted. Get out of here.
Seriously.
Yeah, he just, to me, like, Helena is such an interesting, compelling character, but it's like Ted had to go in there and fuck it all up.
Yeah.
And, like, really, like, maybe she was persuaded or manipulated before, but, like, after him, he really did a number on her. Yeah. And that's where it's like, God, but there's she says so much stuff.
Yeah.
So Kathy denied any involvement in the murders. No shock there. And then when
stabbed a dog.
Yeah, she denied all involvement in the murders when questioned by the CID. But later she called up the FBI and confessed.
Come on,
like, dude. Quote: Perry advised that during all of this commotion, the mother woke up once but went back to sleep. Perry said that she woke her up again and tried to get the woman to jump out of the window with her. She said Also, she said she also asked the woman for a gun because she said that the other people were going to kill them. She described the woman as being skinny and possibly pregnant. A little while later, the dark-skinned, dark-complected man ordered Kathy to tie the woman up and kill her. She said that she stabbed the woman several times in the leg and several times in the abdomen. After murdering the woman, she wrote in blood on the wall, quote, "Fuck you pigs, from all of us to you," end quote, end quote.
I thought they just had pig on the wall.
Yeah. This confession does not add up. And the details are all wrong, but she confessed. And then she died in 2006.
So we'll never know.
Yeah, so not even... Then there's Dwight Smith.
Okay.
Errol Morris called Dwight Smith, and all he had to say was, quote, "I'm not giving any statements. That's history, and I'll leave it alone," end quote.
Thanks, bro.
So not helpful, not denying anything, not corroborating anything, just doesn't want to talk about it.
Okay.
It's not super interesting, but I thought I'd mention it.
Yeah.
Here's a little bit more about Greg Mitchell.
Okay, the one who called himself Dave.
The one who called himself Dave and wrote in possibly blood, "I killed MacDonald and his family."
I mean, where did he get the blood, if so?
From his fingers.
Oh, it would bleed that much to be able to write all that out?
Haven't you seen Harry Potter? They write in blood on the walls there.
Yeah, but in the book, it's red paint. The movie just said it was blood.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't recall. And I read the books twice.
I've read them like 10 times. I read them so many times.
So cool. So in 1984, anyway, just to go back to that, I think you can, if you're like in the emotional distress that it claims that he was in, you can make yourself bleed. Or it could have been red paint. Or he could have killed an animal in the woods and used that blood.
Yeah, I mean,
the possibilities are literally endless.
Right, and also, why would he write that if he didn't do it?
I don't know why you would, because he was not manipulated the way Helena was.
Right.
So but he did have like mental issue. I don't know how to say it politically correct or whatever. He had mental health issues.
He was going through some shit
after coming back from Vietnam.
Yeah, PTSD.
I don't know how something like that would make you admit to something like that.
I think it would fuck you up, but yeah, I don't know if it would.
Any mental health professionals who have anything to say on this matter, super curious.
Let us know.
So, in 1984, a friend of Greg's named Norma Lane made a call to the FBI. She claims they never called her back, so she called MacDonald's defense team instead. Okay. She told them that in 1982, so 2 years prior, when Greg was in the hospital, where he later died, Norma and her husband asked what was wrong, and Greg replied, quote, "It's something that happened back when I was in the service. If they find out about it, I'm going to have to leave the country and live in Haiti or something," end quote. Greg gave no specifics besides that he was guilty of a crime that happened a long time ago in Fort Bragg.
Okay.
Greg's widow said this, quote, 2 weeks before Greg died, he was visited by the FBI agent George Battles. He became very worried and started sleeping with a gun by him, end quote.
Oh, fuck.
The defense made a motion for a new trial based on all this information, but Judge Dupree denied this motion.
Of course. He doesn't give a fuck. He's like, no, Jeffrey.
Yeah, and why? And like, why would you if you're like, if you're gonna look like an idiot?
Yeah, true. He's already like,
and this man doesn't seem like the type of guy who wants to look like an idiot.
No, he seems like he's got a little bit of an ego on him.
Yeah, and I think, and you know, in all fairness, I think Bernie Siegel came in with like quite a big ego too. But it's clashed. Like both, and like I think, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I think that the judge, you're supposed to be a bigger person.
Yeah,
you are the judge.
Yeah.
You are basically the referee here.
Right.
Who is in charge. So
yeah, like obviously the defense and the prosecution are going to be biased. You're the one who needs to be the middle ground.
The defense and the prosecution, it's their job to be biased.
Yeah, yeah. So true.
So Dupree wrote in his closing, quote, Helena Stokely, Kathy Perry Williams, and to a more limited extent, Greg Mitchell, were drawn to the case and have contributed to a factual charade which has allowed it to continue for more than a decade and a half. Their confessions, I just air quoted, have been shown to be unbelievable, and even with the affidavits ordered to corroborate the statements, if the government were again called upon to present its evidence at a new trial and MacDonald was able to put all or even selected parts of his new evidence before the jury would again reach the almost inescapable conclusion that he was responsible for these horrible crimes, end quote.
Okay.
I just think it's kind of sketchy to say a jury would do this.
Yeah.
Because the whole point of having a jury is for them to figure it out, not you.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I don't know. Overall, Judge Dupree, to me, he seems like probably not the person that should be fairly judging things in this scenario.
And, we haven't heard from him. We've only really heard.
True.
And though I have to say, both books said he was a pretty biased.
Yeah.
So I think it's like there was one of the lawyers who I will talk about, had very nice things to say about Dupree.
Okay. Was he a defense lawyer or a prosecution
lawyer? He was a lawyer who was appointed to help Helena.
Okay.
But he said that he said that he was a polite guy, that he would he was really nice to the jury.
Yeah.
So, and in that sense, I think it's
could be manipulative too.
It's really easy if it's clear that you as the judge are
on one side,
and then you're being super extra nice to the jury.
Yeah.
He's it's gonna rain. He knew that all the people were farmers, so he's I know it's gonna rain at 4:00, so I'm gonna let everybody out by 3 so you can get home to your crops.
So he could be manipulating the case through the jury.
Well, then it's are we gonna take this guy's side? We fucking like him. He's a cool guy.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Sorry, I feel like I say that every time. I don't know. Anyway. Errol Morris got in contact with the lawyer that had been appointed to Helena during the trial, as I was just talking about. His name was Jerry Leonard.
Okay.
And here's how Jerry described Helena. Remember, at this time, when she came in, Judge Dupree was she's crazy, she's unreliable, we can't trust her. That's why he didn't want her testifying.
And she freaked
she
out
did
in the
testify,
hotel and she had to leave.
She did testify, but that's why he said that she was unreliable, whatever.
Okay.
So here's how he described her. Quote, I enjoyed talking to her. She was smart and she would ask questions about you. She was in one heck of a predicament. And yet she would say, where are you from originally? What did you like to do? Stuff like that. She was a pretty pleasant person to be around. I'm sure she was a pleasant person to everybody, end quote. And so to me, the way Jerry talks about Helena is completely opposite to how everyone else described her. To him, Helena just seemed like a normal woman.
A nice girl.
Pleasant to be around, could hold a conversation fine.
Right.
Now, I think it's reasonable to assume that most people who described meeting her years before, when she was actually on a lot of drugs and stuff, described her accurately. William Posey, for example, talked about how she would go in and out of, just talking to you and then, seeming like she was at the crime. And it, that to me is it's unreliable. It's weird. She's literally on drugs. But Jerry Leonard spent a considerable amount of time with her at the trial. So I find it to be a bit of a conflict that Judge Dupree to note that she was so out of it.
Yep.
And for Jerry to describe her like this.
At the same time.
Yes. And now saying that, I do think that there exists the possibility that Helena made herself seem drugged out to the prosecution and to the judge and whatever, because I think it's clear based on some of the alleged conversations she had, for example, with that guy Red, that she just had to seem unreliable and drugged out for people to not trust her as a witness, and that's how she got away with everything. So maybe she, everyone was oh, she's so stupid, she's so on drugs. Maybe she was smarter than that. Maybe she knew that by acting like that, nobody would trust her, and that it just got too garbled and they would just forget about her.
Yeah, which is smart if it.
And that worked.
Yeah, true.
So one thing is for sure, Judge Dupree's description of Helena Stokely and Jerry Leonard's are very different.
Yeah.
But this, and then there's also the time frame. There's the people who described her as super drugged out, and then later she was not. Mm-hmm. At one point, Jerry Leonard arranged a chaperone for Helena, a woman named Kay Rybold. And the following is a statement that Rybold gave to Ted Gunderson 5 months after the trial. Okay. Quote, during the trial of Dr. Jeffrey MacDonald in August of 1979, I was asked by Jerry Leonard, the attorney who represented Helena Stokely, if I would spend time with her acting as a companion and a friend to her. It was understood that I spend time with her to and from her hotel room, in her hotel room, and in the witness room at the courthouse. Mr. Leonard requested I do not discuss Dr. MacDonald's case with her. I agreed. I also explained to Mr. Leonard at this time that I felt he should know that I believed in Dr. MacDonald's innocence.
Okay.
So that's her bias, and she's stating it openly.
Mm-hmm.
He stated that it was permissible for me to listen to Helena's comments and feelings regarding the case as she volunteered them, but to not request information from her or ask her questions regarding the case. My experience with Helena Stokely took place over a 3-day period of time. During this time, we established a rapport in our conversations. She made some statements that I felt were significant. At one point, when we were discussing her involvement with the children at the Tammy Lynn Center, it's a center for children with disabilities in Raleigh, she hung her head and said quietly, sorry, I'm burping, quote, "I still remember Kristen's face. Her face seems familiar to me," end quote. This statement was repeated at least one other time when we were discussing her love for children in particular. And in particular, an epileptic child she had cared for. Other significant remarks were made in a similar context. That is, a feeling or an image seemed to push to the front of Helena's mind and into her conversation with me. She stated to me that she still felt she was there at least 3 times during our experience together. She recalled at one time she remembered Dr. MacDonald on the couch. She recalled at least 2 times that she remembered a hobby horse being broken.
Okay.
The last day that I spent with Helena, we were sitting in a witness room, and she stated to me that she had not indicated on the witness stand the extent in which she was involved in witchcraft. Okay. She told me she was into it much heavier than she had testified.
All right, let's go more down this path.
She also noted that she intended to return to it, her involvement with it. It was at this same time that she confided that when everything was over, she was going to disappear and no one would ever find her. Other than the statements made above, I do not recall any other statements Helena made pertaining to the trial that were significant. During the time I spent with Helena, she seemed depressed and in ill health, but I felt that her state of mind was lucid. I had the impression that she had undergone some horrendous experiences considering the extent of her involvement with drugs. However, I felt that her feelings and her remarks were reliable.
Wow.
Yeah, in the 60-minute interview, she goes into a lot about like how she was involved in a cult, a witchcraft cult, and that she like was involved in witchcraft, and like the reason she's doing this is because she doesn't want them to like steal her firstborn child and sacrifice it.
Yeah, which is crazy if it's true.
Well, but also it's like,
I mean, it's crazy either way, but
I don't buy it.
Yeah,
I never buy when people say that they're into like a satanic cult. I just like don't believe it
so
exists. It's
rare.
so
yeah,
and it's like you're just like a random person in Fayetteville. Like you're not a fucking witch. Get out of here.
How dare you?
I don't know. Just they blame so much stuff on like satanic cults. Yeah. And it's like, it's never a satanic cult. It's literally never a satanic cult.
Yeah. Has it ever been? I don't know.
So, and lastly, there was one more person that Helena confessed to during the trial.
Okay.
After the altercation with her shitty boyfriend at the motel, Red and Wendy Rowder, remember Wendy?
Her shitty boyfriend.
Took Helena into the emergency room. Lynn Markstein was also in the emergency room, just innocently sitting there waiting for an x-ray, and Helena struck up a casual conversation with Lynn, and then Lynn claims that Helena said the following. This poor woman.
Yeah, seriously.
Quote, she said she was at the MacDonald house during the murders, and she remembers looking down and seeing the small child in the crib, and she was standing over the crib looking at the child who was covered in blood.
That's fucking terrible.
Just this poor woman who's waiting for an x-ray. She's got a fucking broken arm or something, and this like random weird lady is just like, I did it. She, I believe she said the child's throat was cut, but I'm not sure. However, she did say something about a lot of blood and how horrible it was.
Yeah, it sounds fucking horrible.
She also said something to the effect, quote, can you imagine someone like me doing that to those babies? End quote. No, how could she imagine? Because she doesn't know you.
She doesn't want to know.
A random lady. The reason I remember the statement is because it stood out above all others. I remember it because of her hand motions, and it was weird. According to her, there was no doubt in her mind about being at the crime scene. Not once did she say she thought she was there. End quote.
That's not good. Imagine just being this lady.
So during this trial, she comes in. She makes statements about her guilt to Wendy Rowder, Kay Rybold, and Lynn Markstein. And then we will also get to a man named Jimmy Britt. Okay, so in 2012, MacDonald had a new appeal. One major new piece of evidence came from a sworn affidavit by Jim Britt. Oh, shoot, I'm going to have to get my laptop out for this.
Okay.
Aidan, perhaps you could get it out of my bag and pass it to me. Jim Britt had been dead, but his wife was there to testify alongside of his affidavit from November of 2005. This is, I'm going to read selected. So an affidavit basically goes through like, 1, blah, 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 this is a fact too. This is a fact.
Can you tell me what is an affidavit?
An affidavit is basically just like somebody making a statement and they're like legally swearing that this is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Cool. Okay.
So it's just a statement.
It's a statement, but it's got it.
Yeah, like this is what it looks like. We could probably put pictures up, but there's tons of pictures of this.
Sure.
But it just states everything, and it's like in bullet point basically. So I'm just going to read points that I think are relevant, and that will get across what it is. But the first one is like, so it starts with I, Jimmy Britt of 616 Wimberley Road, Apex, North Carolina, affirm that the following statements are true and accurate to the best of my recollection. Okay. So we'll go to, and I'll say what the numbers are in case you're interested. Sure. 6, I was one of the United States Marshals assigned to the proceedings of the trial of Jeffrey MacDonald in 1979. 7, in the summer of 2004, I took a trip with my friends Lee Tart and Cecil Goins. Mr. Tart is a retired inspector with the United States Marshal Service, and Mr. Goins is a retired deputy United States Marshal who is now the sergeant, blah, 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 not important. During this trip, I shared a moral burden with Mr. Goins, one that I had shared previously with Mr. Tart. On the trip, I talked to both men about my being privy to some events that happened at the MacDonald trial. I also told them of the many years I had been carrying this moral burden and how deeply it troubled me. 9. In January of 2005, I first contacted Mr. Wade Smith, who was one of the defense attorneys, of my own accord, and told him I would like to meet him with regarding the Jeffrey MacDonald trial. 11. Sorry, I can't breathe. What I shared with Mr. Smith is that during the Jeffrey MacDonald trial, in my capacity as a United States Marshal assigned to the district court where MacDonald was tried, sorry, I lost my slide. What I shared with Mr. Smith during the trial, in my capacity as a United States Marshal assigned to the district court where MacDonald was tried, I was assigned to travel to Greenville, South Carolina, to assume custody of a witness by the name of Helena Stokely.
Oh, fuck.
I picked Miss Stokely up at the county jail in Greenville, South Carolina, and drove her back to Raleigh. In the course of my law enforcement career, I have learned to identify persons who appear to be under the influence of, this is number 12, influence of alcohol or drugs. At no time when Miss Stokely was in my presence did she appear to be under the influence of alcohol or drugs.
Interesting.
13. Miss Jerry Holden, an administrative person in the United States Marshal's office in Raleigh, accompanied me on the trip back to Raleigh with the witness. Miss Holden is now deceased. 14. It was clear that Miss Stokely knew she was being brought into Raleigh in connection with the MacDonald trial.
Yep.
15. During the course of the travel from Greenville to South Carolina to Raleigh without any prompting from me whatsoever, Miss Stokely brought up the matter of the trial of MacDonald, and she told me, in the presence of Jerry Holden, about a hobby horse in the MacDonald home, and that she, in fact, along with others, was in Jeffrey MacDonald's home on the night of the MacDonald murders. 16. I knew at the time that what Miss Stokely had said was very important, and it was something I was not about to forget. I remember her words clearly, and they're among the most important words I've ever heard in my life in connection with any case of any of my official work. 18. Is that right? Yes. 18. At the courthouse, I first took Miss Stokely to the office that was used by Jeffrey MacDonald's attorneys on the 7th floor of the federal building. I left her there with Mr. Smith and Mr. Bernard Siegel. When the lawyers were finished, I escorted Miss Stokely to the 8th floor to the U.S. Attorney's office. 20. When I delivered Helena Stokely to the U.S. Attorney's office, Mr. Blackburn asked me to remain in the room. This was not an unusual occurrence. I had been asked to sit in the room by the government attorneys many times in my career. 22. After Miss Stokely was settled in the room, Mr. Blackburn began to interview her. Miss Stokely told Mr. Blackburn the same things that she had stated to me on the trip from Granville to Raleigh. She specifically mentioned the hobby horse and the various other things, and specifically told Mr. Blackburn that she, along with others, had been inside Jeffrey MacDonald's home on the night of the murders. She also said she had gone to the MacDonald house to acquire drugs. 23. When these statements were made, I was absolutely aware of the importance of Miss Stokely's words to Mr. Blackburn. There was no doubt in my mind today. I am still absolutely certain that Helena Stokely told James Blackburn that she was in the MacDonald house on the night of the MacDonald murders with other people. 24. After Helena Stokely had given the history of her visit to Jeffrey MacDonald's home, Mr. Blackburn stated, quote, "If you testify before the jury as to what you have told me or said to me in my office, I will indict you for murder," end quote. 25. The importance of Mr. Blackburn's words was not lost on me at the time and never has been. I have no doubt that this is what Mr. Blackburn said to Helena Stokely in my presence. 30. Subsequently, Mr. Smith suggested that I submit a polygraph examination regarding the events and the conversations I witnessed as outlined in the sworn affidavit, and I agreed the polygraph, which I passed. 31. I am currently 67 years old of age. I felt compelled to clear my conscience and come forward with what I witnessed, as I decided I could no longer shoulder this burden any longer. 32. I came forward to Mr. Wade Smith of my own free will and accord. I have not been promised any compensation, nor have I received any compensation. So, there's a lot of contention over this affidavit. Yeah. There's a lot of people who feel that his, like, the whole trip that he said where he picked up Helena, that's all wrong, and, like, it's documented that he didn't take her from A to B or blah, 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 which I don't think is proof that this didn't happen.
But it's annoying. But so it, like, puts a wrench in it for sure.
True. And, for example, but it's all very conflicting. Then, so Jerry, the lawyer, he's, like, talked about Jim Britt and was like, he was a great guy. Like, there's no way he would have lied about this. And then there's other people who were like, he was pissed off that he felt that he was treated poorly and, like, this was his way to get back at the prosecution, blah, blah, blah. But one thing can be said is that this situation that Jim Britt describes would be a perfect explanation for what happened on the stand.
Yep.
It would be a perfect reason why she went into the prosecution to have her meeting and they said everything was fine. And then she
said something completely different to the defense.
Well, she went into the defense and said what she said, which they thought made her sound guilty, but then didn't say it on the stand.
Right.
And it would make sense as to why she's confessing to all these other people who can't really do anything about it. Because she really wants to get it off her chest.
Yeah.
And it would also make sense as to why they appointed her a lawyer when they did. Because the lawyer's job was to then just sit her down, not let her testify until the statute of limitations was over.
Yeah.
Which was 6 months from when this trial happened.
Which is so annoying.
Which, how on earth anywhere ever had a statute of limitations on murder?
Yeah.
Is beyond me.
Agreed.
But I don't know. Jim Blackburn, of course, denies these allegations.
Okay.
He denied that Jim Britt was even there.
God.
And just as a side note of information, Jim Blackburn has gotten himself into some legal trouble since the 1979 trial. He was convicted of 12 counts of felony fraud, and he spent 10 years in prison for this.
It's annoying how many of these people later have, like, their own...
Well, it just, when you are a prosecutor or a police officer or a judge and you do something illegal, that's super suspect to me. I'm sorry, but you should be held in a higher standard.
I agree with that.
If you were laying the law down to other people, if you are using the law to prosecute other people or to arrest people or whatever, you better not be fucking breaking it.
It's true. And we know there is a lot of, obviously, corruption within the justice system. So.
Of course, but I just think it's should, cool. And maybe this is, like, a little too much, but, like, you should be punished more harshly if you are representing a court of law and then doing illegal shit.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
You really can't.
You know?
It's not cool.
It's like when a doctor abuses patients.
Right.
It's like you should be punished even more because these people come to you in their time of need and you're supposed to help them.
Yeah.
And if you then, like, hurt them, you were abusing your power.
Yeah.
It's worse than, like, a regular person committing fraud, in my opinion.
Okay. I think it's the same, but that's a fair. I agree, like, that your statement is fair.
Yeah. I think it's the same, like, morally, but it's...
Because a lot of the times people who abuse are in a position of power, like parents to kids, like, type of thing anyway.
I think anybody who abuses children is horrible. But, like, a parent abusing their own child?
Yeah.
Get the fuck out of here.
You really should.
You know? Anyway, I don't know. Maybe that's just, like, obvious, but I don't know. I think
should be obvious, but...
I think if you're upholding the... Like, if you are holding other people to the law and that's your job...
Hold yourself to that standard,
You know? But and to me, it doesn't mean that Jim Blackburn is lying, but, like, it puts into question his reliability.
Yep.
So, and now we will discuss A Wilderness of Error in general. So this is the book, A Wilderness of Error, and it was published in 2012.
Yeah.
Errol originally shopped the idea around as a film, but he couldn't find a buyer, so he decided to write a book.
Okay.
In 2020, Mark Smerling came out with a 5-part miniseries of the same title, which I watched in its entirety. I really enjoyed it. Cool. Mark Smerling is a filmmaker, and he's best known for the miniseries The Jinx.
Yep. That was a good one.
Which he produced and directed. And he was also a producer on Capturing the Freedmans.
Okay.
Did you ever watch that?
No.
Great documentary. Loved it. So Mark's version of A Wilderness of Error is very interesting. 2 things were very clear to me after watching the series. 1, Mark is a huge fan of Errol Morris.
Okay.
In a New York Times article about the series, Mark straight up says that the series is an homage to Errol Morris's work.
Got it.
And it's very evident in the style, for sure.
Okay.
And 2, Mark Smerling and Errol Morris do not agree on a whole lot about the case.
Interesting.
So the series A Wilderness of Error essentially goes through a number of claims in Errol Morris's book, and it's like based off the book. Like Errol Morris, I think, sold him the rights to make this.
Got the same name. It makes sense.
And he like more or less tries to debunk them. And it's not super clear cut.
While still like appreciating
and like Errol Morris is in which I think is like really interesting.
Did he just pull a Joe McGinnis on Errol Morris with this?
I don't think he like did it in a shady way.
Right.
I think he was like pretty upfront about what he was doing.
Interesting.
Or at least a bit.
Okay.
But yeah, you could definitely see what was going on. So at the end of the series, he kind of goes for this huge gotcha moment with Errol Morris.
Oh, shit.
He has Errol sitting down for an interview at the end of the last episode. And visually, it's very similar to an Errol Morris type interview with like the multiple camera angles.
Love that.
And which was his homage. Before the interview, Smerling has cut together multiple interviews with Jeffrey over the years. He has the Dick Cavett show, and at least like 4 or 5 other clips of Jeffrey at various ages, and they all cut together beautifully as if they're a single interview where Jeffrey recounts the night of the murders very specifically and with consistency. With this montage, in my opinion, Smerling is saying Jeffrey says that this is how it happened. His story has remained consistent and detailed since 1970.
Right.
That's the point of that montage.
Okay.
Smerling then presents Errol Morris with a portion of Helena's 60-minute interview. Now, I sent you the 60-minute interview, but this portion is not in there.
Okay.
The footage, I had to believe that Errol Morris has seen before, although that's an assumption. And in this section of the interview, Helena is recounting her version of events from that night. So basically, Ted Gunderson is like, so tell us what happened that night. And she says what happened, and it's a very different version from what Jeffrey says.
Interesting.
And it's the details are different. So like, she's like, we came in and there was a discussion with Jeffrey, and then they started fighting, and I think Ted Gunderson's like, well, what weapons were used? She's like, no, they were just fists, and like it's just like a completely different. Like Jeffrey's like, he was woken up on the couch, and there was knives and ice picks and blah blah blah. So after watching it, Smerling says, quote, so either she's got the story wrong or Jeffrey's got the story wrong. What do you think? End quote. And this is where Errol Morris, like, you can tell he's like, and I don't know, like, he's definitely edited it in a way to make Errol Morris seem like he was, like, caught really off guard.
Right.
Which I find questionable because, like, what, has he not seen these clips before? Like, he talks about these clips.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But anyway, Errol Morris, seeming a little bit flustered, replies, quote, I think that Jeffrey's account is suspect, and it really seems internally inconsistent and not entirely believable. Do I believe that means there were no intruders in the house? Maybe. Maybe it could be an elaborate way to cover up his own participation in the crime, but I don't know, end quote. Smerling, quote, do you think from that story that she was in the house, end quote. Morris, quote, I don't know. Does that tell me that she wasn't there? Not really. One thing we know about human beings, they have an almost infinite ability to believe anything, and people are endlessly suggestible. But it goes both ways, of course. If we don't like a story, we can say that it's confabulation. It's confused. It's unreliable. And if we don't, we can say that it isn't confabulation. We can rely on it. People take sides. People respond to one narrative versus another. We are compelled by narratives much more by narratives than by evidence. Evidence invariably takes a second fiddle to the narrative. Smerling, quote, do you think you're still a reliable narrator of the story? End quote. Morris, quote, I never was a reliable narrator. I'm not immune. I am as fucked up as the next guy. I always have thought that a sign of intelligence is never, ever to convince yourself that you know something when you don't. To be able to say, I don't know, I don't understand, I'm confused, I'm fucked up, have mercy on me, please, end quote. In the same previously mentioned New York Times article, Errol Morris had this to say about being the subject of the documentary. quote, I can't control it. I'm not the director. I feel that Mark really wanted me to say that this experience has changed my views about the case, but I don't believe that they had or have. The case is for me a quandary and remains a quandary. There's a reason I called it a wilderness of error, end quote.
Yeah. Like he's saying, guys, I never said he was innocent. I was just talking about it.
Which I have a slight problem with.
The book is very biased.
So he claims, and I'll get into this one more quote from Aaron Morris, but he claims that he was not trying to prove Jeffrey MacDonald's innocence.
Right. Just trying to show how they messed up the case.
Yeah, and I think that's debatable.
It's fucking debatable. I read the book. He really implies his innocence.
Yeah, I think that no matter what he says, it really seems like he's really trying to say his innocence because he doesn't really give any of the evidence against MacDonald, which I think there's a lot of.
There was, and I read the book. Maybe he mentioned that Jeff was like cheating on his wife, maybe, but it was very glossed over if he did, and that's a huge fucking piece of the puzzle.
It's the motive.
Yeah, it's massive. The fact, yeah, exactly, the motive that he wanted to get rid of his wife and kids. He never really wanted to marry Colette in the first place, but like just saying this potential could be true. He never really wanted to marry her in the first place, but she got pregnant, so he kind of had to. Sign of the times, he had to do it at that time, and then he was getting to be this like hot successful doctor and wanted to get rid of them. And also, let's just point out, after her murder, he moved to California and started dating a whole fucking bunch of women. So that's like now
that's
knowing
motive,
that
absolutely.
Yeah, now knowing that info, it should have been mentioned.
Yeah, the fact that was
omitted.
I don't remember. Like, look, this is a 500-page book. Maybe it's in there, but
maybe he mentioned it somewhere. But pages and fucking pages about this other stuff. Yeah.
And so I'll say one more thing. So there's another interview that I read with Errol Morris after A Wilderness of Error, the series came out.
Okay.
And this person says, quote, he suggests that with A Wilderness of Error that you were trying to repeat what you did with The Thin Blue Line, which played a role in freeing an innocent man from death row. And if you recall last episode, I basically said, like, I think that's what he was doing.
That's the vibe, yeah.
Whatever. And so I want to just read this because he refutes that. And so I want everybody to know that this is his statement on that.
Let's hear it.
Quote, that's absolutely not true, and I can defend myself against that. Would I want to repeat A Thin Blue Line? Absolutely, yes. Who wouldn't want to prove someone innocent and affect some kind of change on that basis? If you ask me, would I want that? Yes, I'm raising my hand. Yes, please, call on me. But was that in the back of my mind that maybe I could repeat this with the Jeffrey MacDonald case? That's making me look a lot stupider than I think I am. Oh, I'll pick this really fucked up case and I'll make this impeccable, unassailable argument for Jeffrey's innocence. No. Am I, unlike everybody else on this planet, not influenced by my enthusiasms and my hatreds? No, I'm a human, and I chose this case, I believe, because I knew how fucked up it was. And I wanted to examine that. And I wanted to examine how we're led in so many strange directions. I'm still glad I did the book, and the book is, of course, really different than Mark Schmerling's series. He is interested in making a case for guilt. I clearly am involved in something different. There's this presumption that if I'm not making the case for guilt, I have to be making the case for innocence, or vice versa, that I could not be examining something different.
Right.
And I want to give, I
love Errol Morris.
I don't like to assume people are lying. Yeah. I don't, because I just think that's an uncharitable way to take people when I don't think Errol Morris has done anything to warrant me believing he has ill intentions.
Not at all, but I think he's kind of covering his ass a little bit.
I think that's definitely possible. And I really like a lot of the things that he said at the end of the movie, how like a true sign of intelligence is never being so sure of yourself that a true sign of intelligence is questioning things and being open to the possibility of this being that, or like of you being wrong.
But I think he's being a little bit intentionally evasive. I think it would have been cool if he kind of admitted, listen, like, yeah, I did go into it with a bit of a bias from A Thin Blue Line and the success that I got from that and the rewardingness of freeing an innocent man. But now, seeing all of your information in the documentary, maybe I can like own up to the fact that I could have been wrong.
But I think, and to be absolutely charitable to what he's saying, I think he's saying I could have been wrong all along.
Right, but that's not really what's implied in the book.
It's true. And I think that there's a lot of people who read the book and were like, I didn't like his tone. He was really condescending and this and that. And
but that's more subjective and individual. The fact is he only really detailed evidence pointing towards MacDonald's innocent.
Yeah, no, and I do agree with you. I really shy away from trying to predict somebody's intentions,
right,
when you just can never know. So
right.
I'm putting forward, like, I read the book and that's what I got from it.
Me too.
Being somebody who knows Errol Morris's work, who loves Errol Morris's work, I read this book being like, okay, he did Thin Blue Line, and that's what I've inferred from the book, that he wanted to have another case like that and prove somebody innocent.
Yeah.
He's saying that's not the case, and I think it's possible that it's true. I think it's possible that it's somewhere in between that, but he does admit that, like, yeah, of course I'd want to do that again.
Yeah.
So, that was my take originally, and that is what he said, and that way everybody has all of that information and knowledge, and everybody can make their own decision, decide what they think on their own.
Yeah, and we want to hear what everyone thinks, because this is fucking twisting my brain.
Yeah, and
like,
so
every day I read about it, it's different.
That is all the evidence I'm gonna give. That's all the, like, there is so much more in the book. There's so many more pieces of evidence that they went through. Helena's mother gave a sworn affidavit on her deathbed that she believes Helena did this, and then blah, blah, blah. And then Helena has two brothers. One of them thinks she did it. One of them doesn't. So it's just, at some point, this could have been 10 episodes, but, this is the longest series we've ever done. So, like, we got to see if you guys even like doing long ones.
Did you even listen to all of them?
So I didn't want to get too ahead of myself.
Fair.
But now we have a couple minutes left to discuss our thoughts. And I have no fucking clue. I go back and forth.
Me
After
too.
I read this book originally, and I was like, oh, innocent, of course.
So innocent.
Read this book, guilty as
First
sin.
pointing to wilderness of error, we assume
I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah. Or
then I read
people.
this, and I was like, oh, he's absolutely guilty.
Yeah.
Then I read this again, and I'm like, I just have no idea. And then I went online, and it seems to me, and I didn't really go into Reddit, but I read reviews of the books and other people's interpretations of the crime, and it seems to me that more people think he's guilty than he's innocent.
Yeah.
And he is.
I would agree with that.
He's in prison, like he's never gotten out, so like technically he's been deemed guilty.
Yeah.
But to me, I think I do lean more towards the fact that he probably is guilty.
Yeah.
But to me, if all the evidence that was presented here and all the evidence, and I'm pointing to Wilderness of Error, the book, if all of that evidence was presented, I, as a jury member, would not have been able to give a guilty verdict. I would have believed that there was too much reasonable doubt to say that he was guilty. And I wouldn't be like, oh, I think he was innocent, but I would say, like, the prosecution did not prove their case.
Right.
And I think the biggest factor is Helena.
Yeah.
And that poor woman, I mean, maybe she's a murderer, so I mean, maybe she's not a poor woman, but there's just, she to me is the reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
And Greg fucking Mitchell, like.
Yeah. Why did he write that on the wall?
Well, and just the fact that there's 3 independent witnesses who are all interviewed independently years later, and they all said the exact same thing. They all picked him out. Why would you write that?
Yeah.
And maybe there's a reason for it. And then there's the big thing. It's like, why was he hardly injured, basically?
Yeah,
I mean, his lung was punctured. That's like no small thing. But
compared to
others,
the rest of them.
the kids and the wife, they were massacred. Like it was violent.
Brutal. In the Manson murders, there was nobody that was left unharmed. Or like, you know what I mean? Relatively unharmed. So if this was something inspired by that, like, that's a big flaw in it. Basically, like, there's a few things that I sourced on Reddit. So obviously most of this is like unsubstantiated as people's opinions. Some of the points in favor of Jeff's guilt were the fact that he wasn't that injured, the fact that, like, they were saying, like, that story seems ludicrous, but then at the same time, I'll tell you, like, the other side that I read too. But, like, the idea, like, oh, hippies, why would they break in? But then other people are saying, yeah, Helena Stokely was known on the base. She knew Jeffrey MacDonald, so makes it less unlikely. But the fact that he wasn't that injured, the fact that although he's never, like, admitted guilt in jail, he's always just said things like, I have not been proven guilty. Like, he's never said, guys, I'm innocent. I did not kill my wife and kids. Like, he's never really empathetically, like, stated his innocence in that way or pled for it. He's just kind of been like, true? That's what I read. I don't know if it is or isn't. I did read a confirmed quote about him that said something like, if you guys want me to say that I'm guilty to get out of jail, then I'll be in jail till I die. So he's like not willing to admit it, but he didn't say, like, the quote does not say, I'm just an innocent man, like, desperately pleading for justice to be served. I loved my wife and kids. I would never do this. He never said anything like that from what I've read or seen.
Well, I definitely have seen quotes where he, like, very emphatically says, like, say it. In the grand jury, for example, he's like, I think I quoted it in one of the episodes. He's like, I didn't hurt Kimmy, I didn't hurt Kristen, I didn't hurt Colette, I would never do that. And, like, he went through and was like, I didn't stab them, I didn't stab her, and I didn't stab her, and I didn't do this. So to me, I just feel, and maybe, I don't know if I'm remembering, I know that quote happened, but maybe I do feel that most people who've been wrongly convicted are constantly saying, I am innocent. Yeah. I'm innocent. I'm innocent. Yeah. So maybe he hasn't said that or something like more to the effect of that. It just seemed kind of
weird. And definitely the fact that he was like, so the thing is, it's like, I guess this doesn't necessarily prove his guilt because we know he was already cheating. And so the fact that he went around like dating a bunch of women right after Colette died, it's like maybe he didn't do the murders, but he was like, kind of glad she's out of the way. Like, so it doesn't necessarily mean that he's guilty of the murders, the fact that he was doing that, but I do think it's suspicious. Like, he didn't show any signs of mourning ever, which is weird.
Based on Joe McGinnis's book, I think
he was like stressed in the hospital and stuff. Yeah.
Well, there's that, but for a very short amount of time after the murders, and for a very short amount of time, he like took a trip with his mom to, I forget where it was, like Florida or something, and like was on the beach, and like she claims that he was just like totally depressed and blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't think that he showed no remorse, but I think he got over it like absurdly
suspiciously quickly,
and then was just like back to like, and I think
laughing on the talk show.
If the motive that we're asserting is that he wanted to get out of his marriage and responsibilities so that he could go do his own thing. Right. And I think that he was like doing his own thing when he was cheating, but it's like, it's so much easier to like not have to like then go home to your wife and then do all this.
Another kid on the way, whatever.
And he just like dove right headfirst into that lifestyle very quickly, was dating all these girls, and like, it's a lot, man. Yeah. And like, to me, that it just does go right to motive. Because if that was your plan all along and you did that, then like, okay, you succeeded and that's what you're going on to do.
Right.
Because to me, it's not very smart to get right into that and be so flashy and get a huge boat and, be living it up. And there was a couple like celebrities that kind of got on his side after the Article 32 hearing. So he was like schmoozing with all these rich people and celebrities and just like living it up and loving it.
Which again, maybe he didn't want this to happen, but he was like, oh, but I'm free now and just like, I'm moving on. But one of the other things I read was like, this was kind of a theory that like him and Helena Stokely had been somehow involved in it together because they knew each other. So I don't know if it was a scenario where like they showed up and he was like, okay, you guys can kill my wife and kids. Like, I don't think he would do that, but maybe it would give him an out if he's like, guys, don't hurt me.
And it would keep the forensics clean of him.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it would align with why Helena could be guilty and Jeff could be guilty.
Yeah.
Because they both kind of seem guilty. It's like, listen, I don't know what happens when your brain is addled by years and years of drug abuse. I don't know. And maybe Helena had like suffered something in her childhood that had affected her mentally forever. I don't know. But why would she be admitting the guilt if she didn't have any involvement at all?
Now, so I think that it's possible because people were claiming, and now there's all these people who claim that she was a very smart person, but I think, and there was somebody who was discussing like in a police interrogation, and we know how much I love interrogation videos.
Yeah.
Interrogations are also, they can go very wrong.
Yeah.
If you are, a higher IQ person with like a lower IQ person, or somebody who's like in their right state of mind versus somebody who's not in their right state of mind, it's very easy to manipulate somebody.
Super easy.
To believe something. There's been many people who've been made to believe that they committed a murder or a crime.
Yeah.
But they didn't.
Right.
And so to me, like, it's a very skilled interrogator who can recognize that they have an upper hand on somebody and get information out of them while ensuring that they are telling the truth, that they're getting truthful information out of there, and recognizing when you are causing them to say what they're saying.
Stressing them too much to be able to think clearly.
And I think I'm assuming that people who are listening to this have, been aware of many wrongful convictions that have occurred based on interrogations and people confessing to things that they didn't do. So I think it's extremely possible that happened, and then she just grew to believe that she did it, and then that was her new reality.
Right.
I think that's possible.
It's possible, yeah. So, are we gonna give our conclusion? Do we think he did it? Okay, we can
Gun to your head, did he do it or didn't?
Yes, I think he did. Ooh. Okay, but I think
if there was a gun to my head, I'd say yes.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's just, I just can't, like, if I'm just chilling, I just can't say that without a caveat.
Yeah, I think the trial was, we can easily say trial was unfair. Defense was, like, suppressed by the judge. So that's fair to say. Maybe if you were on the jury, you would not vote. Like, you would vote for him to not
If I was on the jury for the trial that happened, probably I would say guilty. But if I were on the jury and all the evidence that I think should have been let in was let in, I probably would say
reasonable doubt.
Not guilty.
I think that he did it because I just don't think that there's any way that he would not have been murdered. Like, what if, like, say the people did come in and whatever, and they're like, stab, 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 murder. But hey, Jeff, like, you maybe, like, finally does give them drugs, and it's like, fine, then we'll let you go, kind of thing. Like, I don't see that really happening. I feel like there's just no way that why would they target his wife and kids and not him?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
And, like, leaving a witness too, like,
motive, means, and opportunity are all there.
Yeah.
And
also, like, how fucking creepy is it to picture, like, Jeff being like, let me just write pig in one of their blood on the wall.
Right. And if he did do it, my God, what a horrible, horrible, horrible person.
Yes. Oh, here's one more thing that I read on Reddit was, like, remember how we talked about him potentially being on amphetamines and how, like, some people are known to get violent on those diet pills? Well, what everyone was saying online was like, well, listen, like, I've taken diet pills. It doesn't do that unless you take, like, a fuck ton of it. But it sounded like Jeff was taking a lot of it. He had stayed up for, or maybe, we don't know, potentially. But he had also been staying up, like, for hours and hours. Like, I think it is possible that obviously, like, maybe he wouldn't have done this any other day, but just, like, everything all combined made it happen.
Well, and the theory is that, like, it started out of a fight.
Right.
And that, like, the motive, it wasn't that he planned this.
Yes.
But that he got in a fight and ended up hitting Colette.
Yeah.
And then the first kid, Kimberly, saw that what happened.
Right.
And so he had to kill her. And then he's like, well, there's only one left. Gotta kill her too.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're running low on time. We gotta wrap this up.
Yeah.
But please, let's continue this conversation on YouTube or on Instagram or wherever you feel like talking to us.
Yep.
Please. Okay, I gave it. What did I rate this? I don't remember. Did I say 5?
It was something between, like, 4 to 7. Like, it was, like, somewhere around there.
Yeah, it's pretty wide.
Super.
What do you rate it?
Go
back and listen to the first episode if you want to know why I rated it. I don't remember.
To me, it's
you
like.
Can put it on the screen now.
Okay, yeah. To me, it's like 4 or 5, I would say. I think that it wasn't premeditated, which lowers it. But the fact that it was his family and, like, brutally fucking killing his family raises it up.
Brutally killing children and pregnant women. That's like,
dude, that's up there, dude. Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Please let us know, and please continue discussing that with us. Please go check out our YouTube page.
Yeah.
You can see us.
We're here.
Talk about this.
In studio.
Yeah, we have a new setup, and it's awesome. I don't know how new it is now, but whatever. Our YouTube channel is called Who's Knocking? ? I believe there's a question mark.
Subscribe.
Check us
leave
out
a comment.
Yeah, please leave us a comment, subscribe. It would be really, really helpful and great if you subscribed. Would really highly appreciate that. Instagram at Who's Knocking Podcast. Send us an email if you feel like doing that. Super old school. Hello at whosknockingpodcast.com. And
Twitter, although we have not really posted anything on there as of the time of this recording, but who knows, maybe something's on there.
Yeah,
Who's Knocking Pod?
I've been meaning to get around to it.
Yeah, we'll get around to it.
Yeah, so just everybody stay safe out there because you never know
who's knocking.
Bye. This podcast is produced in collaboration with Lost Line Media. Artwork by August Digital. Music by Matthew Cook.